The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, stamped with the Riverside Meadows HOA seal. Daniel Reeves, 52, a hydrological engineer and the county's water resource commissioner for the past 14 years, read the directive 3 times before the full audacity sank in. The HOA board was ordering him to drain his private lake within 30 days or face daily fines of $500. His lake, the one he'd legally excavated, permitted, and maintained for 12 years. The one fed by natural springs on his 15-acre property. But as Daniel set the letter down and reached for his laptop, a slow smile crossed his face. These people had no idea who they were threatening. Before we dive into how a water commissioner dismantled an HOA's illegal power grab, if you love stories where entitled boards meet the experts they should have researched first, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a patient professional too far, the confrontation where bureaucratic power met actual expertise, and the resolution where an overreaching board learned why you never challenge someone who literally writes water law. The first part takes us into Daniel's world, a man who'd spent over a decade balancing environmental protection with property rights, who'd purchased raw land specifically to create a sustainable ecosystem. We'll feel his disbelief turn to calculation as an HOA that formed years after his lake existed suddenly claimed jurisdiction over water they never controlled. We'll watch him exhaust every reasonable channel, only to discover the board president had personal motivations that had nothing to do with community welfare, and everything to do with lakefront property values he wanted to manipulate. Then comes the confrontation, where Daniel attended an HOA meeting armed not with anger, but with documentation that would make these amateur bureaucrats understand they declared war on the one person in the county who controlled their entire water future. The moment he placed his commissioner credentials on that conference table, the air in that room changed completely. Finally, we'll witness justice delivered not through revenge, but through the patient, methodical application of regulations the board never knew existed. Some lessons cost money. This one would cost them something far more valuable. Here's exactly how it happened. Daniel Reeves had purchased the 15-acre parcel in 2011, back when Riverside Meadows was nothing but surveyor stakes and architectural renderings. The land came cheap because it was considered unusable, a depression-prone section with seasonal flooding that made traditional development impossible. But Daniel, who'd spent 2 decades studying watershed management and aquifer recharge systems, saw something different. He saw an opportunity to create something sustainable and beautiful. The permitting process took 18 months. Daniel worked with the Army Corps of Engineers, the State Department of Natural Resources, and his own county office to design a 3-acre lake that would serve as both a recreational space and a crucial recharge basin for the local aquifer. He hired contractors, excavated to precise specifications, installed overflow management systems, and planted native vegetation around the perimeter. The project cost him $87,000. When it was complete in 2013, the lake filled naturally from underground springs and seasonal runoff, creating a pristine ecosystem that attracted waterfowl, fish, and the attention of every environmental science class within 20 miles. The first homes in Riverside Meadows broke ground in 2015. By 2018, the development had expanded to include 240 properties, and suddenly Daniel found himself surrounded by neighbors. Most were friendly enough, though a few made comments about his pond being an eyesore, which baffled him considering his property values had actually increased the desirability of the entire area. He'd even allowed the community to use a small section of shoreline for catch-and-release fishing, thinking it would build goodwill. The HOA formed in 2019, and Daniel opted out immediately. His property predated the development, and state law was clear that existing landowners couldn't be forced into associations they hadn't agreed to join. He attended one early meeting out of courtesy, introduced himself, explained his work with the county, and assumed that would be the end of it. The problem started 6 months ago when Richard Pemberton was elected HOA president. Pemberton, a real estate investor who owned 4 rental properties in the development, had been pushing for years to create exclusive lakefront access that he could market to potential buyers. The fact that Daniel's private lake wasn't part of the HOA didn't seem to register in Pemberton's calculations. First came the informal request. Pemberton knocked on Daniel's door on a Saturday morning, all smiles and neighborly charm, suggesting the lake would make a perfect community amenity. Daniel politely explained it was private property with specific environmental permits that prohibited public access beyond the limited fishing area he'd already designated. Pemberton's smile tightened, but he nodded and left. 3 weeks later, Daniel received a letter claiming his lake violated HOA covenants regarding water features and required board approval for maintenance. Daniel responded in writing, citing the timeline of his ownership, the irrelevance of covenants he'd never signed, and suggesting Pemberton review basic property law. The letter he received back accused him of being uncooperative and hostile to community standards. Then came the citations. 3 of them delivered over 4 weeks, each claiming different violations: excessive water usage, unapproved landscaping, and creating a nuisance wildlife habitat. Daniel contacted the HOA's management company, spoke with their lawyer, and provided documentation proving every claim was baseless. The lawyer actually apologized, said there seemed to be confusion, and Daniel thought the matter was resolved. That's when the certified letter arrived, ordering him to drain the lake within 30 days. Daniel read the justification with mounting disbelief. The board claimed his lake was depleting groundwater resources for the community and creating flooding risks. Both claims were not just false, but demonstrably opposite to reality. His lake was literally designed to recharge the aquifer and prevent flooding. Daniel sat in his home office that evening, looking out at the water that reflected the sunset, and made a decision. Enough. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7. Daniel arrived at 6:45, carrying a leather portfolio and a cardboard file box. The meeting room at the community center was already half full, board members clustered at the front table while homeowners filled the folding chairs. Pemberton glanced up when Daniel entered, and something flickered across his face before he turned back to his papers. Daniel took a seat in the 3rd row and waited. The meeting opened with standard business: approval of minutes, treasurer's report, a debate about playground equipment. Then Pemberton cleared his throat and announced they'd reached the topic of non-compliant water features on properties adjacent to the development. "We have a situation," Pemberton began, not looking at Daniel, "where an individual has refused repeated requests to address a significant water feature that poses environmental and safety risks to our community. Despite multiple citations and a formal order, this individual continues to—" "Point of order," Daniel said quietly, standing. Every head in the room turned. "I believe you're referring to my property, Richard, and before you continue, I think the board and these homeowners deserve accurate information." Pemberton's jaw tightened. "Mr. Reeves, this is a closed session regarding compliance issues." "Actually," Daniel said, walking to the front of the room and setting his portfolio on the table, "this is a public HOA meeting, and according to your own bylaws, any property owner affected by board actions has the right to address those actions. You've been sending me legal threats for months. I'm here to respond." He opened the portfolio and removed a laminated credential card, placing it where everyone could see. "For those who don't know me, I'm Daniel Reeves. I've been the County Water Resource Commissioner since 2011. That means I oversee all water rights, usage permits, and aquifer management for this entire region, including," he looked directly at Pemberton, "this development." The room went silent. Daniel reached into the file box and began placing documents on the table, narrating as he went. "This is my original property deed, dated March 2011, 4 years before Riverside Meadows existed. This is my Army Corps of Engineers permit for lake excavation, approved June 2012. This is my state environmental impact assessment, which concluded that my lake would provide significant ecological benefits. This is my water rights documentation, showing I have legal claim to the underground springs that feed the lake. And this," he placed a thick binder in front of Pemberton, "is the complete regulatory framework governing water resources in this county. I know it well, Richard. I wrote most of it." Pemberton had gone pale, but he recovered quickly. That doesn't change the fact that your lake is affecting groundwater levels in our development. We've had 3 homeowners report well problems in the past year. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm aware. I reviewed those reports last week as part of my official duties. Would you like to know what actually caused those well issues? He pulled out another document. Illegal irrigation systems installed by Landmark Landscaping, the company that your rental properties use, Richard. They've been overdrawing from the shallow aquifer, which is why I issued citations to 12 properties last month, 4 of which you own. The board members were staring at Pemberton now. Daniel continued, his voice calm but firm. Your lake drainage order claims I'm depleting groundwater. In reality, my lake recharges the aquifer by approximately 48,000 gallons annually. Your order claims I'm creating flooding risks. In reality, my overflow management system has prevented flooding in your development 3 times in the past 2 years. Your order claims I need HOA approval for a water feature. In reality, I had state and federal approval years before your HOA existed, and you have 0 jurisdiction over my property. He placed one final document on the table. This is a cease and desist order, effective immediately, prohibiting this HOA from making any further claims regarding my water rights or property. It's signed by the county attorney, reviewed by the State Water Resources Board, and backed by 12 years of legal precedent. Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping. You want to play games with water law, Richard? I am water law in this county. Every permit you need, every variance you want, every drop of water that flows through this development crosses my desk. You tried to bully the one person who controls your entire infrastructure. He straightened up and looked at the other board members. I suggest you elect new leadership, quickly. The board meeting devolved into chaos within minutes of Daniel's departure. According to 3 homeowners who later contacted Daniel personally, Pemberton tried to dismiss his claims as intimidation tactics, only to have the board's own attorney pull him aside and quietly confirm that Daniel hadn't just been right, he'd been generous. The legal exposure from their actions could have triggered state investigations, permit reviews, and potential criminal charges for harassment and abuse of authority. By Friday morning, Daniel received a formal letter from the HOA's law firm. It wasn't an apology exactly, but a carefully worded withdrawal of all previous directives regarding property at 847 Meadowbrook Lane, and a confirmation that the board recognizes your property predates the association and falls outside HOA jurisdiction. The letter was signed by 3 board members. Pemberton's name was notably absent. The real reckoning came 2 weeks later. Daniel was in his office at the county building when his assistant mentioned that Riverside Meadows HOA had submitted applications for 3 new water permits. Expanded irrigation for common areas, a decorative fountain at the main entrance, and hookups for a planned community pool. Standard stuff, usually approved within a week. Daniel reviewed the applications carefully. Everything was technically in order, all the proper forms submitted, fees paid. But as water commissioner, he had discretionary authority to require additional environmental impact assessments for projects in sensitive watershed areas. And Riverside Meadows, as it happened, sat directly above a primary aquifer recharge zone. He scheduled a site inspection for the following Thursday and sent formal notification to the HOA. The letter was professional, courteous, and requested that board representatives be present to discuss water usage optimization and sustainable development practices. Pemberton didn't show. The other 4 board members did, along with their attorney and a visibly nervous property manager. Daniel spent 3 hours walking the development, taking soil samples, reviewing existing irrigation systems, and asking detailed questions about water consumption patterns. His tone remained friendly, educational even, as he explained how their current systems could be modified to reduce waste and improve efficiency. Then he delivered his assessment. The applications would be approved, but with conditions. The irrigation expansion required installation of smart meters and drought-resistant landscaping. The decorative fountain needed a recirculation system that met current efficiency standards, not the cheaper model they'd specified. The community pool required a comprehensive water conservation plan, including covers, proper filtration and public education about responsible usage. Total additional cost to the HOA, $47,000. The board vice president, a retired teacher named Patricia Hernandez, who'd voted against the lake drainage order, asked quietly if the requirements were negotiable. Daniel smiled and said they were standard regulations for any new water infrastructure in the district. He'd be happy to provide examples of other developments that had implemented the same systems. In fact, he'd recently helped a neighboring community reduce their water costs by 30% using identical modifications. Your choice, he said simply. Invest in sustainable infrastructure now or face mandatory upgrades later when the county updates watershed protection requirements next year. Either way, these changes are coming. I'm just giving you the opportunity to control the timeline. Patricia nodded, understanding passing between them. They weren't being punished. They were being educated, and it was going to cost them. 3 months later, as summer settled over the county, Daniel sat on his dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of copper and gold. The fishing had been spectacular this year, the ecosystem thriving exactly as he designed it to. Across the lake, he could hear children playing at the small public access point, their laughter carrying across the water. His phone buzzed. An email from Patricia Hernandez, now the HOA president after Pemberton's quiet resignation. The subject line read, "Invitation to Community Appreciation Event." They wanted to thank him for his guidance on their water systems and invite him to speak at their annual meeting about environmental stewardship. Daniel smiled and typed a brief acceptance. He'd never wanted conflict with his neighbors. He just wanted them to understand that respect wasn't negotiable and authority meant nothing without expertise to back it up. The water lapped gently against the dock pilings. Somewhere overhead, a heron called out as it glided toward its evening roost. Daniel leaned back in his chair and watched the last light fade from the sky. His lake was exactly where it had always been, exactly where it would remain. And the people who'd tried to take it from him had learned a lesson that would ripple through this community for years to come. Sometimes justice doesn't require revenge. Sometimes it just requires reminding people that the systems they take for granted are maintained by experts they shouldn't have challenged. And as Daniel sat there in the peace he'd built with his own hands and protected with knowledge earned over decades, he understood that this was the truest victory. Not destruction of his enemies, but transformation of his neighbors into allies who finally understood what stewardship really meant. Across the country in Sedona, Arizona, retired aerospace engineer Linda Voss received a citation from her HOA demanding she remove her unauthorized satellite dish. Linda set down her coffee and pulled up the Federal Communications Commission's OTARD rule on her laptop, the same telecommunications regulations she'd helped craft during her 23 years at NASA. "Please," she murmured, drafting her response, "send me another citation." "I'd love to introduce your board to federal preemption law." The president's reply came within an hour, but that's a story for another time.